This is an overview of fat taste perception, and we're going to start by having a discussion on the good and bad types of fat and the purpose of fat taste perception, that gene. So fat taste perception is genes that affect your perception of fat as a flavor and as a texture. Fat is not only, one of the three main macronutrients for calories in order to burn, to make energy, to run your entire body. Fat is also structural in nature. It's, your cell membranes, which are basically the cell walls. Not cell walls are, it's not technically correct. It's because cell walls are a more technical term biology for plants, but they make up the surface area of each of your cells is made of fats. And genetically, there's some people who like the flavor of fat more than others, and we can view this from an evolutionary lens that people who prefer the flavor of fat more, they tend to want to have more fat, which means they'll want to get more, they'll get more calories as a matter of just preference, and all the subtle things of adding just a little bit more of this, or taking a bite more of the fatty part of the animal here versus there, etc. So it's all things trade-offs that people who crave, who really like the flavor of fat, they can be extra. They can be extra motivated on the hunting part of the hunting and gathering. In a prior video, we talked about craving sugar, and now we're talking about preferring the flavor and texture of fat. So people who really love fat, they could, in theory, be extra motivated on the hunting side of things, to go to find and hunt. Just combine those two together, or maybe it was fight and hunt, whatever. To hunt animals or game that have higher fat content. In fact, it's known through the anthropological research that a lot of Aborigines, if they killed a kangaroo in Australia, but the kangaroo didn't have enough fat on them, they wouldn't bother to drag it back home. There's also when Weston A. Price did his research with the Seminole Indians, I believe it was with the Seminole Indians, but that there was very specifically a tribe would hunt older bull moose because the older bull moose had this giant slab of fat on their back, which was prized. And you'll find that most of the anthropological cultures back in Dr. Price's days in the 20s and 30s, they all prized higher fat animals and animal products. The animal products varied based on the part of the world where you're in, whether it was the golden, orange colored dairy fat from in the isolated Swiss villages from the grass that was just freshly growing when the first shoots of spring, that changed the color of the butterfat, to coastal tribes that would hunt after very fatty shellfish and octopi. The older bull moose that I mentioned, wanting only the highest fat kangaroos in other parts of the world, or at least in Australia. So fat is extremely important, and also contains fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, what's called the Price factor, which was named after Weston A. Price, which is theorized to have been vitamin K2, and there's other things that are important, that other components of fat that are very important structurally and nutritionally. So the thing about fat is that fat has been bastardized today quite badly, and a lot of that came out of the Industrial Revolution, and more importantly, World War II. It started with World War I, but it really took off with World War II, where there was always the threat of food shortages, and also the issue of storage and transport and sending food overseas, and traveling and sustaining. So the hydrogenation, so there was this movement in the chemical industry to change to make really, really cheap vegetable fats like cottonseed, canola oil, corn oil, soy oil, safflower oil, rice bran oil, and to take these cheap, thin polyunsaturated oils and then hydrogenate them to give them the texture, and then they would artificially flavor them to have the flavor of like butter and other more solid fats. So, and the problem is that these trans fats, these highly processed fats, and highly heated fats are structurally very inflammatory and dangerous to the human physiology, but they mimic what healthy fats from a flavor and texture standpoint are. So your body's being tricked through modern technology. So what I've done is that I've made this slide on what are the healthy fats in green and what the bad fats are in red. And if you are, so like the monounsaturated fats would be olive oil, macadamia nut oil, avocado oil, lard, and then the nuts, that would be like cashews, almonds, macadamias, and pecans. A couple of notes. Lard is technically a monounsaturated because it's determined by the ratios of the types of fats, and lard is mostly monounsaturated as opposed to saturate. Lard also has a lot of vitamin D if it's in a healthy pig that is outside. There's and as a note, like always get clean fats, because you can wash a carrot, you can't wash a fat. Fats they will take on the fat soluble pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides, and heavy metals and everything else. So you really want to prioritize really clean fat. You really do, because you can't wash it out. Polyunsaturated fats, this is for like low, very, like sesame oil and grapeseed oil. Those you can heat on low heat. Sesame oil has an extra special antioxidants in it that make it okay for cooking. Grapeseed oil just at a lower heat point. But there's certain polyunsaturated fats you never heat, like fish oils, flax oil, and hemp seed oil. And then nuts that are more polyunsaturated fat in their content are walnuts, pine nuts, and Brazil nuts. Now, walnuts go rancid very, very easily. So ideally, you'd only want to get them shelled, and you crack them open and do that. Or you find walnuts that have been kept in the freezer section in the health food store, because walnuts, you can smell them, they can smell rancid, or if you can't smell them, you can taste it. There's like a little kind of acidic bite in the back of your throat. Walnuts that have gone rancid are not worth eating at all. So just watch out for that. And also preparing nuts, you ideally want to soak them in salt water and then dehydrate them to help remove the phytases and other natural preservatives in them. Then there's saturated fats. The healthy saturated fats are coconut oil, tallow, palm oil, ghee, and if you can tolerate dairy, high-fat dairy foods and butter, if you can tolerate it. Now, I already know that some people will be objecting because they're still locked in 1950s adulterated research saying, oh my God, saturated fats cause heart disease. I say trans fats and hydrogenated fats and deep fried old reused fats, yeah, would. But what happened was that when Eisenhower died of a heart attack, what happened is that there was a collaboration and a conspiracy, really, of the sugar industry and the tobacco industry and the vegetable oil industry to find a culprit other than those three things that contribute to heart disease. And they landed on saturated animal fats as the culprit. And so it was all this money from the sugar industry and the vegetable oil industry and the smoking industry that went to demonize saturated fat as the cause of heart disease. Now, the plaques in the arteries, so cholesterol is, first off, cholesterol is an animal fat, and it's not a saturated fat. And it's a different thing entirely. But even it's cholesterol, they say, oh, you have high cholesterol in your blood. Well, cholesterol is the precursor to, it's a precursor to your sex hormones. It's a precursor to cortisol, your stress and survival hormone. It's the precursor to vitamin D. It's important for the intestinal lining. It's 50% of all your cell membranes is made of cholesterol. It's an antioxidant. It's a structural molecule. Again, like takes 50% of your cell membranes is cholesterol. It's a major part of the immune system. So cholesterol goes up. LDL is the lipid molecule that transports cholesterol away from the liver. LDL, when I used to teach it in board reviews, is leaves the liver, LDL. Cholesterol goes up when you're infected, inflamed, damaged, stressed, or growing. And kids need more cholesterol because they're building cells. So if people have high cholesterol, then they should look at those 5 things. Are you infected, inflamed, damaged, stressed, or are you growing? Or some combination. And the cholesterol acts as a spackle on the arteries to plug a potential leaky artery. So arteries have a single cell that's wrapped like a burrito on the inside called the endothelial layer. And if there's damage and that cell wall, it gets damaged, and then the wall of the artery starts to crack, then you get what's called internal bleeding, which is really, really bad. So the body will plug up the cracks with cholesterol to stop internal bleeding, so to prevent it from happening. So it's like blaming cholesterol and saturated fat on heart disease is like blaming fires on firemen, because you make the same logic. Well, there seems to be a lot of firemen around. Whenever there's a fire, I don't know, it seems pretty suspicious. It's like, well, they're there to help, and so correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation there. And so coconut oil, again, these have to be clean sources: organic coconut oil, organic tallow, organic palm oil. And there are monkey-safe palm oils out there. There is palm oil, particularly from Indonesia, that's very problematic because it's kind of a slash and burn policy over there. So if you do get palm oil, make sure that it is from a monkey-safe growing methods. There are palm oil. There are palm oil resources that don't harm those animal populations, but you have to look for them specifically. Ghee is if it's clean ghee, meaning they have fully filtered out the the dairy proteins and the dairy sugars, then it should be okay for people who are sensitive to dairy proteins and lactose, the dairy sugar. But sometimes it's hard to find ghee that's clean. Then we've got bad fats like trans fats. So this is margarine, this is COFA, which is the junk coconut oil that they leave over, and it's kind of gross. Vegetable spreads and packaged foods. There's lots of trans fats in packaged foods. And I also would warn you that there's a labeling bait and switch. So if a packaged food says 0 grams of trans fat per serving, that is a red flag, because according to the label laws, you can say 0 grams of trans fats per serving if there is under 0.5 grams of trans fats per serving. So they can play mathematics games with you by just changing the number of servings technically on the package so that the mathematics works out that there's technically under 5 grams per serving. So if you've got 6 servings of something that's 0.45 grams of trans fats, then you've eaten 2.7 grams of trans fats if you eat the whole thing. And the problem with trans fats is that they stick around in your body for a really long time. They cause all sorts of havoc with your metabolism and inflammation and all the rest of it. So be very, if you just avoid things in packages, you'll pretty much be okay, because they're technically not packaged food. If it's got one of my favorite things to share with people is that if it's in a package and it's got more than one ingredient on it, it's probably not food but a food product. And not all food products are bad, but I don't know any single ingredient whole foods that are like you buy a chicken and it's wrapped up and it's just a chicken. It's food. But if you buy a thing that's like these chicken, like some weird package thingy or whatever it might be, like you're looking at a food product. So you'll avoid most of the junk sugars and the junk oils if you just don't buy packaged foods. There are other oils to avoid. These are post-industrial fats that never existed before the Industrial Revolution because they lacked the high pressure, high temperature machines and the industrial solvents like hexane to extract oil. I mean, if you look at an olive and you look at a soybean, which one's oily? It's not the soybean. Yet there's this entire enormous industry revolving around extracting soybean oil from the soybean. And then all these soy protein isolate, quote unquote health bars, that was just a marketing sleight of hand because all these major soy companies, and the main ones are Arch Daniel Midland and DuPont, the pharmaceutical company. DuPont is a major soy stake holder. And so they defatted they call them defatted chips. They take soybeans, they defat them with hexanes and these other processes. So they got this leftover soy protein sludge and they don't know what to do with it. So it took them about 20, 30 years to convince people to have soy bars and soy ice cream and soy burgers and to just basically take this waste product and turn it into a profit center. So that's kind of the dark history of the soy industry here in the West. So you want to avoid these oils. Any oil that didn't exist before the Industrial Revolution, you probably should avoid. So soy oil, corn oil. I mean, how much oil is in corn? I mean, really. Canola. So peanut oil. So peanuts are problematic in that they're legumes. They're not actually nuts or peas, and that they've got a lot of aflatoxin on them. So either they have lots of pesticides on them to kill the aflatoxin, which is highly carcinogenic, or they don't have the aflatoxin on them and they're organic. Oh, so they're organic and don't have the pesticides on them, but they may have loaded with aflatoxin. So if you can find aflatoxin-free peanut oil, that's organic and cold pressed, great. But I think that's gonna be pretty hard to find, and you might as well just get the other more guaranteed cleaner oils. Safflower oil, cottonseed oil. I would never get walnut oil unless it was cold pressed from fresh walnuts in the dark, and because it's so fragile in oil, and you only use it for salad dressings and not for cooking. Any vague vegetable oil you assume is some mixture of these crap oils. Refined palm oil, rice bran oil, shortening, hydrogenated oils, spreads, all these stupid spreads. Like Land O'Lakes, I can't believe it's not butter, just terrible, terrible stuff for you. And then there's deep fried oils, old oils, and reused oils. And this is why it's problematic to go out to restaurants to get, fried foods, is because they usually just reuse all the oils and that's really rancid and old and reheated. Like there's one of my Chinese medicine instructors described there's this one really ultra rare fancy restaurant in one of the main cities of China where it's so exclusive, it's ridiculous. Like a plate of fried like a plate of fried okra is $100 or something because they change out the oil for every single dish. That's how exclusive they are in terms of how they do their cooking. So the reused oils are really bad. Because you'll see in the next section, the 6 things that damage oils is heat and air and time. And so if you have old reheated oils and sitting out in a big vat, then it's exposed to those 3 things. It's just constantly getting more and more oxidized and damaging. So at the end of this long discussion, the important thing is that really, if you're going to spend money on food, spend it on in these order of priorities from the foods that are most fragile to the least fragile: oils, proteins, and vegetables. And I would put grains in there also with the vegetables, because oils you cannot wash. You can wash a carrot, but you can't wash coconut oil. They take in the fat soluble pesticides, insecticides, the heavy metals, etc. You want to put your best money on oils because those are the most fragile of the food groups. So the macronutrients, I should say. the other thing is that there's a general rule of thumb when you're looking at your carb tolerance, that the lower your carb tolerance, like I'm a 2, I'm the second lowest you can be, the lower your carb tolerance, the more fat you need to eat metabolically. So it's like, then the higher your carb tolerance, the lower amount of fat you're going to need, because it's that teeter-totter of, like, there's carbs as kind of the measurable variable, and then if you're a lower carb person like I am, then you're going to need more fat and protein to make up for it. So that's the big picture overview on fats. And then in the next video, we're going to talk about the 6 ways that you damage fats and how to avoid them.